Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dig into a source that has a pretty, let's say, unconventional take on money. And it all starts with a really simple choice, one that seems obvious, but apparently reveals a much deeper and maybe even a more worrying financial world than most of us realize.
All right, let's just jump right in. Picture this. Someone walks up to you and offers you a choice. In one hand, they have a crisp, fresh $10 bill. In the other, a kind of dusty old 1964 Kennedy half-dollar. Which one do you take? I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? You grab the 10 bucks. But according to the source we're looking at today, that is absolutely the wrong move.
And here's where it gets interesting. The source argues that the smart play, the only play, is to take that old coin. Now, why on earth would you do that? Well, because that half-dollar isn't just a coin. It's made of real silver. That $10 bill, according to this author, it's what they call fake money. And that simple distinction, well, that's the key to this whole thing.
So from this perspective, grabbing the $10 bill isn't just passing up on a few bucks of silver. No, it's a fundamental error. It's a mistake that comes from a massive misunderstanding of what money really is versus what we just use for currency.
So what in the world does the author mean by fake money? Well, the argument is that the cash in your wallet isn't actual wealth. Think of it more like an IOU from the government. It's basically a form of debt that's not just able to lose value over time, it's actually designed to. And once you wrap your head around that idea, everything else starts to click into place.
So how exactly does this so-called fake money lose its value? Well, it's through a process we've all heard of, right? Inflation. But this source gives it a much more sinister name. They call it a silent thief, something that is constantly and quietly stealing your wealth day in and day out, whether you notice it or not. And the math on this, according to the author, is just brutal. Let's say your bank is generous and gives you 1% interest on your savings. Sounds okay, right? But if inflation is humming along at 5%, you're not actually making money. You're losing. You are losing 4% of your buying power every single year. You're basically getting paid in a currency that's melting like an ice cube in your own bank account.
And this math leads the author to a really blunt and pretty shocking conclusion. In this kind of system, the classic advice we all got, save your money, is actually a trap. When inflation is beating the pants off of interest rates, the people who save their money are the ones who get punished.
So you have to be asking, how did we even get into this situation? Well, the source points a finger at one very specific moment in history. A moment when, as they put it, the entire global financial system just went completely off the rails, and the very nature of our money changed forever.
Here's how it went down. See, before 1971, the US dollar was on the gold standard. That meant, at least in theory, you could walk up and exchange your paper dollars for a set amount of physical gold. But in 1971, that link was totally severed. The dollar became what's known as a fiat currency, which is just a fancy way of saying it's backed by nothing more than a government promise. And that moment, the author says, opened the floodgates.
And the consequences of that decision? Well, according to the source, they have been absolutely staggering. It unleashed the ability to create new money on a scale that is almost impossible for a normal person to even wrap their head around.
Let's just talk about the number 1 trillion for a second. It's one of those numbers that's so big, our brains just kind of short-circuit trying to imagine what it really means. To try and put this into perspective, the source gives us this incredible analogy. If you spent $1 every single second of every single day, it would take you almost 32,000 years to spend $1 trillion. It's an impossibly huge amount of money.
Okay, so hold on to that thought, that 32,000-year number, because here is the real kicker, the shocking claim from the source. That amount of new money, $1 trillion, is now being created roughly every 90 days. And that constant flood of new money just dilutes and devalues all the money that's already out there.
You know, there's actually a classic economic rule for this. It's called Gresham's Law. And it basically says that bad money drives out good. When you have a devalued currency being forced on people, what do? They instinctively hold on tight to the valuable money. It's the exact reason you don't find silver coins in your pocket change anymore. The good money all went into hiding. Now here's the pivot. In the face of all of this, the source argues that the wealthy don't get hurt by this system. In fact, they actually use it to their advantage. They understand the rules of this new game, and they play it completely differently than the rest of us.
The source lays out these two totally different mindsets. On one side, you have most people who are taught to work for money and save it in dollars, which we just saw gets hammered by inflation. But the wealthy? They're said to focus on something else entirely. acquiring real, hard assets. They don't just stack up dollars. They use those dollars to buy things that actually hold their value, or even go up, as the currency gets weaker.
This quote from the author just nails the whole strategy. By owning real things, property, commodities, businesses, inflation suddenly stops being your enemy. It actually becomes your friend. As the dollar weakens, the price of all those real assets, when measured in dollars, just goes up and up, making the owner rich.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? The source is really pushing for a radical change in how we even think about wealth. It's about shifting your entire perspective away from counting dollars and cents to counting something real. The author suggests a simple, two-step mental shift. First, you have to stop obsessing over the dollar figure in your bank account as your main measure of success. And second, you start measuring your true wealth in something tangible: ounces of gold, square feet of real estate, you name it. So why the big focus on stuff like gold and silver? Well, the author points out a few things. First, they've been used as money for thousands of years. They have real, intrinsic value. And unlike paper money, a government can't just fire up a printing press and create more of them out of thin air, which is a really big deal when you consider the author's final point, that every single fiat currency in the history of the world has eventually failed and gone to zero.
And that really brings us to the final, really unsettling question that this whole analysis leaves us with. When you look at the math, the history, and the strategies being used, you're left to wonder, is the very money that we work so hard for, the money we save, actually designed, from the ground up, to just disappear over time? It is a heavy thought to end on. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.